Hi, and welcome to Series 3 of the Australia Academy Dern History Revision podcast. This series is going to focus on early Elizabethan England. As always, this will be a collection of around 5 to 8 minutes of podcast focusing on different aspects of the Elizabethan course. It's not meant to replace your regular revision sessions. What it's here to do is to fill in those little gaps on the way to school, before your tea's ready, little things like that. Don't forget, if you find this useful, we do have a Series 1 and Series 2. Series 1 focuses on medicine and the Western Front, and Series 2 focuses on Weimar and Nazi Germany. There will be a Cold War episodes coming soon once I've finished the Elizabeth session. Okay, let's get started. So this is episode 2, and we'll focus on Mary Queen of Scots. Who was she, her early life, and why she was such a threat to Elizabeth up until her death. She starts life essentially as Queen of France. She gets married very, very young, and while she's in France, her mum is ruling Scotland on her behalf. Now this doesn't go very well. Elizabeth, not a big fan of Mary of Guise, and so she helps the Protestant lords in Scotland rebel against Mary of Guise. Mary of Guise is very French-influenced Catholic, and the Scots aren't overly happy about this French influence. So we have something called the Treaty of Edinburgh. This is where Elizabeth promises to send troops and money to Scotland to help the Protestant lords rebel against Mary of Guise, on the understanding that Mary Queen of Scots will give up her right to become the Queen of England and the heir to the throne. This doesn't go down well with Mary, because when Mary does eventually come of age and become Queen of Scotland and moves back to Scotland after the death of her husband in France, she finds out that she's no longer the heir to the English throne. Now, she never agreed to this treaty. This treaty was signed on her behalf, so she kicks off a little bit, and there's a lot of to and fro between her and Elizabeth. She's sending her lots of messages, trying to butter her up, trying to be really, really nice to Elizabeth, with the idea that hopefully Elizabeth will still name her as her heir. Bear in mind, we know obviously Elizabeth is not going to get married for the rest of her life. She's not going to have any children, and so we need to know who's going to be next in line for the throne. Now, the Catholics are obviously very keen for Elizabeth to name Mary, so that when Elizabeth does eventually die and Mary takes the throne, England can go back to being a Catholic nation, and we can go back to where we were under Mary, or even under Henry VII and the early part of Henry VIII. So the Catholics very, very eager on Elizabeth naming Mary as her heir. Now, one thing that Elizabeth really wants is to try and control Mary. And the best way she thinks she can do that is by getting Mary to marry a Protestant English lord. Mary not overly keen on this, and so Mary chooses her own husband, and she chooses a guy called Lord Darnley. Now, Lord Darnley is English, but he is Catholic. And the marriage to Lord Darnley is not the happiest of marriages. Lord Darnley is a bit of a drinker, a bit of a womanizer. There are rumours that he is quite physical with Mary. And so things are not exactly going great. However, they do have a baby, James. And once James is born, things start to take a bit of a turn. And Lord Darnley decides that he needs to go to hospital, he needs to check into essentially a rehab. And it's called Kirkhofield. Now, whilst he's there, Darnley is going to die. Now, the suspicious way in which Darnley dies is something that's going to come back and bite Mary. So Mary allegedly has a lover by the name of Earl Bothwell. Now, one of Earl Bothwell's servants is seen at the scene of the crime where Darnley is killed. Now, Darnley is killed by the hospital blowing up with gunpowder, and he is found in the garden strangled. So whether he was strangled before the explosion or whether the explosion threw him out and he was strangled afterwards, we're not 100% certain on that one. What we do know is Bothwell was clearly implicated in some way in Darnley's death. And yet, just a few months later, Mary marries Earl Bothwell, therefore clearly implicating herself in the death of her husband. The Scottish people aren't happy about this. They don't like the fact that their queen is being seen as a possible murderer, and so they arrest her. She's forced to abdicate and name James as her heir and the new king of Scotland. She doesn't, she'll be killed. So she's forced to do this. She manages to escape and decides the safest place for her to go would be England. She stays in Scotland, she'll be recaptured, and she'll be executed. She figures, well, like, my cousin's the Queen of England, surely she'll look after me, and so she comes down to England. Now, when she arrives, she immediately poses a problem for Elizabeth. If Elizabeth sends her back to Scotland, she will be executed. So she is going to be responsible in part for the death of her own cousin. If she stays in England, we now have a Catholic royal in England that will possibly spur up the Catholics into trying to dispose of Elizabeth off the throne and putting Mary on the throne instead. So Elizabeth can't really take that risk. So what Elizabeth does instead is she puts Mary in prison without trial for the next 19 years. Now, when we hear the word prison, what you and I are now thinking in our heads is not what Mary's going to go through. We're not talking bars on the windows, gruel for tea or anything like that. Okay, these are stately homes, big posh houses, where Mary is free to roam the house and the gardens. She's allowed outside. She's just not allowed to leave the grounds of the house. Some places near us, Hardwick Hall, which is just near Chesterfield. She stayed there for a while. She spent a bit of time in York. The problem is Elizabeth had to keep moving Mary. Okay, so every few years she had to move to a new location, because once the Catholics knew where she was, then plots would start to be put in place in order to try and free Mary from those prisons. So she's constantly on the move. She spends a bit of time in Sheffield as well. Okay, now there are 4 plots that happen during these 19 years that Mary is in prison, and we'll look at these in more detail during episode 3, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. But the last one, the Babington plot, is the big one, because the Babington plot is what is going to lead to Mary's eventual execution. I'll go into more detail in the next episode, so don't worry too much about the actual ins and outs of it right now. What you need to know, though, is that the Babington plot was discovered by Francis Walsingham. He presents the evidence to Elizabeth and says, right, here's the deal. Mary Queen of Scots has betrayed you. She's implicated in a plot to kill you. We need to do something about this. Elizabeth signs the death warrant for Anthony Babington, who's in charge of the plot, but she's reluctant to sign the death warrant of Mary. And it's not until 6 months later that she finally signs this death warrant and says, here's the deal. I've signed it. Do not execute her unless I know. She's still very reluctant. This is still family. However, Walsingham, Cecil, they know that Mary's a threat, and they know that Elizabeth is never really going to give them the permission to execute Mary. So, behind Elizabeth's back, they execute Mary Queen of Scots on the 8th of February, 1587, at Fotheringhay Castle. Now, the executioner knelt down to Mary while her head was on the block, asked her for forgiveness. This was quite a regular thing that people did, okay? But the fact that he was about to kill a royal, I think, weighed quite heavy on him. So he asked for forgiveness, of which Mary said that she would, and she gave him that forgiveness. She wore red to the execution, which was going against all previous executions that we've seen in this country. Most people wear black. She wore red, and the idea was it was supposed to be very symbolic of a Catholic martyr. She felt she was dying for her religion, and therefore was trying to make a statement with this. When the executioner swings the axe the first time to sever the head, he actually misses and hits her shoulder. The second one comes down and goes through the neck, but again doesn't actually sever the head, so he actually has to saw the rest of the part of the neck off with the axe for her head to drop. The executioner then lifted up the head to announce this is the head of a traitor, and her wig that nobody knew she was wearing actually fell off. When Elizabeth found out that Mary had been executed, she goes mental. Okay, she is not happy about it. She starts threatening with executions here, there and everywhere. And actually the Privy Council that was responsible, Davison, was actually put in prison for 19 months. Eventually he was let out by Elizabeth. So that's it. That's Mary Queen of Scots in a nutshell. Relative, possible traitor, definite heir, and possibly could have become the next Queen of England had Elizabeth and her ministers not acted when they did. Thanks for listening. See you next time.